And I'm going to turn it over to you, Art. Thank you on behalf of everybody here tonight and our school district for joining us tonight and taking some time to take us through this really important topic.
Thank you very much, Deanna. That's a warm welcome. I appreciate it. I'm reminded of the fellow who once said after he was introduced, my mother would like that introduction. You're very kind. But I have been at this for a while, and my area is more in the health promotion prevention side of things. But you know, I've done a lot with my colleagues in early intervention and treatment and other areas as well. I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I'm very grateful to them for their welcome to us to be on this land that they have stewarded so well for so many, many years. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I don't know, what's the weather doing out there, Deanna? Have you got sunshine right now?
You know, it's a beautiful evening here, I think, and we're going to come into some nice weather. So looking forward to it.
So I'll redouble my thanks to everyone who's here, because you could be out on a beautiful evening doing lovely things outside. But this is an important topic. It's something that's often on the hearts and minds of many of us who are parents. I'm a parent. My daughter is almost 30 years old. Just have the one child, but you know, we had some experiences with her, as any parent does with any kid, for sure. It's a subject that is quite compelling in many ways, and we'll get into it in just a minute. You can go to the next slide, please, Deanna. So just to kick things off, what do you see when you look at this image here? And if you like, you can jot it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just call it out. But what is this?
I was thinking seagull, but I'm not sure anymore.
Okay. Rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've seen a few comments there. So depending how you look at it, it could look like a bunny rabbit. Oh, there we go. A rabbit and a duck. Okay. Bunny and a seagull. Very good. So yes, it can be seen as both a rabbit and a duck, or a seagull. So why would I start with something like this? Well, I just wanted to sort of underline that you know, we have different perceptions, and we see things differently, and often both or all views have some merit, but they don't always necessarily agree. And this is a subject where we get lots of views, and some of them differ, and some are more informed than others, and that's fine. And we'll learn more together tonight, hopefully. Okay, Deanna, next slide, please. So these three areas I'll touch on tonight. It's important to understand that drug use happens in a context. And that's actually good news, because we can influence that context, and we can make a difference for people's lives. And then we're going to discuss a little bit about the progressions and indicators of substance use. So there are ways to identify if it's going on, and how we would know, and what we might be able to do about it. And then thirdly, what can parents and caregivers do to make a difference, both in terms of prevention and early intervention, and seeking support when needed. Next slide. So it happens in a context. Next slide. So what are some of the stressors that our young people are facing today? And again, feel free to throw it in the chat, or you can call it out, but let's just brainstorm for a minute or two.
Social media.
Yeah. Peer pressure. Yeah.
I think like health with the vaccinations, that could have been stressful for some teenagers.
Yeah, sure. Schoolwork. I'm getting lots of good things here. stressful home environment, changes in friends, body image concerns. Yeah. So there's a lot of things here, aren't there? And you know, when we're dealing with various stressors like this, and let's be honest, we as adults have a few stressors too, don't we? And in fact, sometimes as adults, I've noticed we think we have a lot more to deal with, and we sometimes think the kids don't really have much to deal with at all. They don't have a mortgage, they don't have a full-time job, whatever. But in fact, when I talk with kids and listen to kids, they feel a lot of stressors. There's kids that have to help get their younger brothers and sisters dressed and fed and out the door. There's kids that are dealing with all kinds of demands on their time, and there's a lot of pressures on them. So when we have a lot of pressure, one of the things that we try to do often is we try to manage those. So next slide, yeah. So we all need to change how we feel sometimes. And ideally, our young people and we as adults would change how we feel in healthy ways that are lower risk. Next slide. But sometimes that isn't always the case. And it's important when we think about drug use, you'll see that I'm not just zeroing in on the drugs and the names of them and what they look like and short-term and long-term effects and all that, because to be honest, that there's a place for that and it's important. But I really feel some of these contextual things are in some ways even more important, because then we can understand why a youngster might get involved with substance use. And usually the drug use is a symptom. It can become a problem for sure, and often does, but it's also, excuse me, a symptom of other things that are going on. So adolescent development, next slide, Deanna. Expecting youth to make adult decisions is like expecting an infant to walk. What do you think? Agree with that? Maybe older youth, that's less true, isn't it? But a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old, they're getting there. They're coming along. Next slide, Deanna. But you know, their brain isn't fully developed yet. This is pretty common knowledge now. We know that it's usually pretty close to age 25 before the last part of the brain to develop, the prefrontal cortex, is fully developed. And that's a very important part of the brain, because it handles what we call executive functioning, which is decision-making and ability to reflect and ability to learn from previous experience and ability to think forward and to plan, and pretty sophisticated stuff. And so your 12, 13, 14-year-old, those abilities are quite underdeveloped actually still at those ages. Add to that, oh, sorry, Dan, do you mind just going back for one sec? So the low impulse control, high sensation seeking, a high degree to be accepted by peers. These also mean that kids are more likely to take risks, to try things out, to do something new, to do something different. And you know what? It's a good thing they do. And we're well designed that way, because what that does is it prepares us for adulthood. But the challenge is right now, to state the worst case scenario, we have poisonous drugs out there that people can access. We also have other drugs and alcohol that can be poisonous depending how they're used and how much is used, especially to a young developing body. So it's really important that we try to steer our youth to healthier ways to take risks, to get that sensation-seeking desire met, and that sort of thing. Next slide, yeah. So this is what we were already talking about. Next slide. So we know, though, that parents matter, and parents have a huge influence. And there's even studies that have been done that when a youngster is out, even if it's Friday night down by the river with a bunch of friends and parents are nowhere to be found, whatever decisions they're making, they still hear the parent's voice. And they're still aware of what are the expectations at home. And kids will often say to other kids, oh, my dad would kill me if I did that. Or my mom will really make me pay if I do that. So parents actually do have a lot of influence. And we know, and this is a researcher here who puts it out, that teenagers need influence, patient understanding, guidance of parents and teachers. They need reminders of potential consequences and guide them towards lower risks and appropriate amounts of independence, freedom, and responsibility. So you don't want to clamp down on them so tight that they got no life, they can't make any decisions, and you're just really running everything, every aspect of their life. But you also don't want to be laissez-faire and just go, oh yeah, do whatever, and I'll see you later, don't worry about it. So we have an important role to play. So next slide, please. So why might kids use alcohol and other drugs? And what I'd like you to do is something called a chatterfall. And the way it works is this. I want you to type a word or two into the chatterfall, but I don't want you, into chat, but don't hit submit until I tell you. You understand what I'm saying? So you can right now jot into chat 1 or 2 words of why kids might use drugs, in your opinion. And I'll give you just a few more seconds to do that. And when I tell you, we'll all hit submit at once. And what'll happen is the chat will just be like a waterfall of all these words coming through at once, and we can all see what everybody's been saying. Okay, so I think you've probably had enough time to type in maybe 2 or 3 words about why kids might use alcohol and drugs. So 3, 2, 1, hit submit. Woo. Oh, wow, good stuff here. Yeah, just scroll through that and have a read. To escape, peer pressure, curiosity, frustration, anger, to look cool, curiosity, low self-esteem, depression, to rebel, pressure, emotional pain, to regulate, mental health and trauma, peer pressure, because others do it. Yeah, okay. So when you look at that list of reasons, is there anything that stands out for you? And I don't know if we can really continue this as a discussion. We can try, but let me ask you the question just slightly differently. When you look at those reasons there, does it tell you anything about drugs? In the sense of, I don't see anybody writing down, well, because marijuana is so great, or because getting buzzed on alcohol is amazing, or so, that's important. I think what you've done here is you've illustrated that the way I like to say it is we don't really have a drug problem. We have a people issue, I'm going to say, not a problem. So we have people who are trying to fit in, belong, cope, deal with anxiety, deal with trauma, deal with boredom, deal with curiosity. Those are normal, natural human feelings. And we can't fault our kids for, wanting to deal with those. Next slide, please. So people who have really studied this, here's an example of what kids say about why they're using. So again, there's a lot of information there, really about people and how they're trying to cope, be part of a group, belong. Feel better, to feel good. So it's important, I think, to shift from, we don't want to be blaming and shaming young people, because that just drives them underground and they'll just hide the behavior even more. What we want to try to do is create safe environments where we have trust and good relationships with kids. Because if we do, you never know, your young person might even come home one night and say, hey, Mom, last night I tried weed for the first time. Now that can be very concerning, especially if they're very young. But I would be very glad if my kid felt comfortable to actually admit that to me. Because it creates an opportunity for some dialogue and some discussion. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember, we don't make decisions out of just hard, rational data. You see, this is where drug education has has been off track for a lot of years. We thought that if we just told the kids about the drugs and gave them all the facts on the drugs, they would know better than to use them. Well, no, that's not how we make decisions as human beings. So emotions lead. So keep that in mind, not the intellect. What you want to do is you want to help the kids to care about the issue and to know what to do. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about if you were going to talk with your kid or you are talking with your kids, that's what you want to do. Now, why have I got a picture of chocolate cake here? Some of you know. It's kind of awkward on Zoom, isn't it? You're welcome to call out, but the answer is, if I've had a hard day and I've been working hard and I come home, nobody's home, there's a great big chocolate cake sitting there, and I'm stressed out and I had a fight with 3 people on my way home. Yeah, temptation. Do I sit and go, I know if I shouldn't really have too much, I'll just have a little bit? Or do I just jump in and, I might eat half the cake? And yet I know what sugar does. And I know, that I should eat a carrot or celery or something, but there I am chewing on the cake. So that's just important to keep in mind the process of how we do this. Next slide, please. So can we reduce the likelihood that a kid might develop a problem? What might help protect a young person from problem substance use? So if you go to the next slide, please, Deanna. So these are research-based, what we call protective factors. So emotional well-being, well, that includes then that we help our young people identify and know what their feelings are. And literally teaching feeling words and us as adults modeling, using a whole range of words to describe our many various different emotions is really valuable and helpful. And then we also want to role model and demonstrate, if we can, how to regulate our emotions, but also how to work them out, how to deal with them. So emotional health is really important. Parent-family support and engagement, hugely important. If kids that feel connected at home, at school, and in the community, they're at much lower risk for developing a drug problem if they feel connected and belonging. We know the data is clear that in the homes where parents express their perspective about substance use, and you don't want to go to the extreme where drug use is awful and you'll burn in hell if you ever do it and you should never ever do it, and because you end up stigmatizing people who already are using substances. We don't need to go there, but you can, in a more rational way, just say, wow, I really am cautious and really hope that you won't get involved with alcohol and other drugs, or at least not until you're older, because it can really create very serious problems for people. And you can then get more specific. So parental monitoring, that includes, where are you going tonight? Who are the friends? Do I know the friends? Do I know the parents of the friends of the home that you're going to? And if you've got a young person, 12 or 13, feel free to put some restrictions around it. That actually lets kids know that you care and you're watching. I'll say a little bit more about some of this later. As kids get older, you want to give them a little more room, but it is important. We've already talked about connectedness, delay of use. I'm going to come back to that one too. You can go to the next slide, please. So there's 3 really pivotal protective factors: ABCs: autonomy, belonging, and competence. So autonomy is the ability to feel like you have some control over your life, that you can self-direct at least some parts of your life. And even, do you remember in elementary, even in elementary, they say to parents, help your kid to learn when they can tie their shoes, or let them pick which jacket they're going to wear within reason, or whatever. You're starting from very young ages to teach that kind of independence and autonomy, because that will give them more strength to stand up to social pressure too. So autonomy is very important. Belonging and connectedness, hugely important. If I feel that nobody cares about me, nobody would even notice if I came or left, if I was here or not. Some kids take that very literally. And where there is self-harm and where there is suicide ideation, that is almost always amongst young people who don't care about themselves because they think nobody else cares about them either. Competence, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of can do. So little successes. What can you have your young people do where they're going to feel, I'm getting better at that. It could be working with tools. It could be fixing their bike. It could be practicing their music. It could be playing some game. There's all kinds of things. But I encourage you to think of the passions that they have. What are their interests? Not your interests so much. What are their interests? And then help them build up competence in some of those areas. Okay, could we have the next slide, please? So what might put young people at greater risk? Next slide. So in a way, some of these are corollaries to what we were just talking about. So parental attitudes are really important. Low parental monitoring. If we ostracize or cut off young people who are gender fluid or are exploring their sexuality, maybe they're not sure of their gender identity, that has to be handled very carefully and with a lot of love and concern and support. In some families, that's not how it's handled, and that can create huge issues for kids. So that drugs and alcohol make them feel a lot different really quickly, and it's really reinforcing. When young people are around other young people using substances, they're much more likely to engage in the behavior. We do know that early childhood adverse experiences are hugely important. And, that can include a whole range of things. The good news is that young people can get help. They can see counselors. They can go for therapy. They can learn ways to express and talk through any early childhood negative experiences that they might have had. And that can make a big difference. But left untreated, people tend to what we call self-medicate. They find their own ways to suppress that pain that they're feeling. Early aggressive behavior in the home has been linked to a greater likelihood that young people use drugs. Of course, mental health, depression, anxiety, poverty. You've got fewer options. Money's tight, food is tight. Kids can't do as many things. Next slide, please. There's also some what we call subpopulations. So some groups within the broader group who are at higher risk of a drug or alcohol problem. Largely, not because of who they are, it's because of who we are, who the rest of us are, and how we treat those people. So if you're a person of color or Indigenous or Black, you know that you're not going to get treated well all the time. If you are LGBTQ2S spirited, again, you may be exposed to shame and embarrassment and ridicule and teasing and bullying. And same with some of these others. So it's not saying that if you are, a Black person, maybe you're a Black gay person. Wow, now you've got two of these things going on. Maybe you're disabled too. So wow, we can really pile it on. That doesn't mean you're going to have a drug problem. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you did an analysis of all the people who end up with serious alcohol or drug problems, you find a higher percentage of people with these characteristics than what you would find as a percentage of who they are in the population. You know what I'm saying? So it puts them at higher risk. Next slide, please. So we know that some of the positive things that we can do. This is Dan Siegel. You may be familiar with him, a very prominent child psychologist. Seen, safe, soothed, and secure. So, think about what you do, what I do, how I am with my kids, how I am in the home. Are we creating these kind of contexts, or are we actually maybe creating stressful and anxious situations? And if it's the latter, maybe we can get some support and help for what we need. Next slide, please. We already talked a bit about emotions. Really important that young people learn that there's many emotions. And here's something else to keep in mind. You can have several emotions all at once or in very close proximity. So you can be elated about, you get a day off school, and you can be depressed and really discouraged that you got a day off school because you don't have anything to do. There's lots of situations where we might have many emotions happening at once, and we need to learn to just embrace that and recognize that and go, yeah, that happens. That's the human condition. What's important is that I express those, so don't hold them in. See, when people go through trauma, or when they hold in emotions, or when they are hurt and they just try and push it under, and I'll be tough, I'll be strong, I'll get through it. Actually, we don't. It just sits down inside us. And this is where drug and alcohol becomes so critical. Because let me tell you about a friend of mine who's, he's an old guy like me, but when he was in grade 8, he got drunk for the first time. And he felt something he'd never felt before. And he wanted to feel it again. Because what was going on in his home was he was being abused. And he was in a lot of pain. And man, when he got drunk, that all just went away. And so it didn't take very long before he found another way to get some more alcohol and get drunk again. And right from the beginning, every time he drank, it was just about getting drunk, because it helped him escape those horrible feelings. And, by the time he was in grade 12, he was basically a full-blown alcoholic. And he suffered through his adult years for many, many years from his alcoholism. So it's really important that we support our people at very young ages. Next slide, please. So how does substance use sort of develop and progress? So next slide. So just a few stats here. The McCreary Society, they're an amazing group, and they're doing this big adolescent health survey, and they're just finishing up. And in a few months, I think it'll be a little while because they have to analyze it all and write it up, but we'll have new data. But from some years ago now, 2018, grade 8 to 12, 44% had used alcohol at some time. But now let's look at these others here. Kids who had drunk at the last Saturday, 61% were binge drinking. So, parents often say to me, well, Art, is it okay if I let my kid have a little bit of beer or wine at the dinner table at home? And I say, well, it's up to you. It's your decision. And some cultures, that's very much a part of the culture, and it might be even maybe watered down wine a little. But I say to them, please don't think that if you say to your young people, you can have a bit of alcohol at home, that when they get out on Friday night with their buddies out at the quarry or at the pit or wherever they go, that they're going to just sip one drink. They'll drink the way you want them to drink in your home. But when they're out of the home, if they're going to drink, 61% of these guys anyways were binge drinking. They're pounding it back. So that increases the risks for unwanted sexual contact, the risks for fights, for violence, for car accidents, for bicycle accidents, all kinds of things, and the risk of getting more dependent and progressing to other drugs. So if you're drinking more and more frequently, that's a concern, especially at young ages. This is why we have a drinking age. If you can make it, if you forget everything else tonight, try to help your kid put it off, delay, wait, not yet, because that'll keep them safer than just about anything. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Now, this is just showing the progression over the years of a whole range of drugs. Yeah, okay, we'll move on. This slide is meant to show, so with drug use, there can be no drug use, which is abstinence. There can be beneficial drug use, which is using maybe for medical purposes or for social purposes. There can be non-problematic. So maybe that's someone who has a beer or two every week, and it's not really a big issue. And then potentially harmful is more drinking or more marijuana use or whatever it is, right through to serious problems. And sometimes somebody is on the beneficial level with one substance, but at the potentially harmful or even substance use disorder with a different substance. So it can get kind of complicated. Okay, next slide, please. So Gabor Mate, this is just again, getting back to those core issues. It's really more about people than drugs. And he says, don't ask about why are you addicted? Ask, what are you distressed about? Next slide. So we've already sort of covered this, but I'll just show you next slide. So this is a little hard to read, but this is a chart showing the consequences of substance use for 16 to 18-year-olds. And you can see, you know, my schoolwork changed. That means it's failing in probably school is what it means. Lost friends, broke up, got in a fight, overdosed, argued with family, all those things are there. And you can see 12 or younger, 13 or 14, 15 or older. And those ages are the age at which they first drank alcohol. You see what's going on here? So if someone first drank alcohol at age 12 or younger, they're at a 45% chance that they've passed out. Whereas if they first start when they're 13, it's 36. And if it's 15 or older, it drops all the way down to 18. So you can see the far right-hand side, those are much more manageable numbers. And it's pertaining to how young were they when they first started. Next slide, please. So here's another one. Instead of harms, this time it's talking about whether they use other drugs. So 12-year-olds and younger, if they're already drinking alcohol, they've had a drink of alcohol, look at the percentages, you know, ecstasy, 30% likelihood that they've used ecstasy. And prescription pills, you can see what it says there. Whereas the 15-year-olds, look at those numbers, they're pretty low, aren't they? So that's what we want. And in fact, we want to bump kids even beyond 15 to 15 or older. That's why we have legal age on tobacco, on marijuana, and alcohol. And we can share this with the kids. We can talk with them and say, you know, we didn't just pull that out of the air. But there are biological, physiological, social, emotional reasons why early drug use, if it's regular and kept up over a few months, we know where that kid's heading. Now, I'm not talking just the odd experimentation, you know, trying it once, especially if they're older. Most kids are going to try it in their teenage years at some point, at least some alcohol, maybe some marijuana. Not every kid, but many will. But if they're 17 and they're trying it and they really do, maybe they don't even get drunk. That's a lot safer than if they're 12 or 13 and they're getting drunk every weekend. Next slide, please. So in terms of our understanding of substance use, we want to be literate if we can. We want to understand it, know about it. So some of the important things, and you know, I can just touch on these tonight, but patterns of use, the frequency, the amount, the methods used, these all make a difference. And the general rule of thumb, as you would know without me telling you, more frequent and larger amounts is more hazardous. And you know, as an adult, that if you go out and assuming you do drink, and not all adults do drink, and good on you, those of you that don't, but many of us do, and those of us that do, you know, I'll go out and I'll try and space out my drinks. I'll have one beer and then I'll have water. I'll mix it up because I'm trying to monitor that. Intoxication, regular use, dependence can occur for sure. Potential harms, the immediate health effects, the chronic health effects, the social consequences. We don't really have time to get into that. Sorry, I'm just clicking on the chat here for a second. Someone from Day One Society, great. Yeah, Phoenix Center, yeah. Yes. A nice ad there for wonderful colleagues. I've known a few people over the years that worked at Phoenix, and I'll say more about other services that are available, but do have a look at that in the chat. And someone's saying about the data being quite dated, and you're right, it is. But the only reason we don't have more current data is they haven't asked those same questions again. But there's no reason to think that any of that has changed. These are the questions that were relating age of first use to other problems or other use of other substances. Post-COVID, yeah, for sure. I mean, if anything, I'm really interested to see what the Adolescent Health Survey will find when they release the results, probably in the fall. Every indicator is drug use went up through COVID. There's also some indication that it may have come down a little bit since then, depending which drugs and what age group, that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So one of the most unfortunate things has to do with tolerance and dependence, and particularly where we see that is people that are more chronic, long-term, heavy drug users. So people that are dabbling in opioids or using them regularly, and maybe they do get off it for a while, or maybe they have to get off for some reason. Maybe they're incarcerated, maybe they've had treatment, maybe, different things. And then one day they decide I'm going to go back to it, and they go right back at the same level that they were using when they quit. And a high percentage of overdoses happen that way because your body's always adjusting, and the body has adjusted your tolerance, how much you can handle, how much before you will feel the effects changes, and can change quite quickly. So yeah, COVID helped my household. Great, stayed home instead, going out to hang with friends. 3 critical years, it could have changed everything. Yeah, absolutely, that's good to hear. And I know there's a lot of people who talked with their kids a lot more and hung with their kids. A lot of dads spent way more time with their kids in COVID, right? Fantastic. So interplay of substance, person, and setting. I'm going to say more about that in just a second. And the age and stage of use. These are all factors to keep in mind when we're talking about drug use. Okay, next slide, please. So this is showing the drug, the person, and the setting. So if you say to me, we used to do a game with kids in the schools, and we'd say, okay, I want you to imagine Angela's at home alone. She's up in her room, and she's smoking a joint alone in her room. What do you think of that? And the kids go, oh, yeah, okay. Well, I guess it's all right. In fact, maybe I'll come over, maybe I'll bring a bag of chips and go join her. And then we'd say to the kids, okay, let's change one variable. It's still Angela. She's home. She's up in her bedroom. It's in the evening. And she's drinking alcohol. What do you think? Oh, she's drinking alcohol alone by herself in her bedroom? That's terrible. I can't believe she did. Oh, she must be addicted. So it's interesting, isn't it? How we think about some of these things. But the point here of this slide is that when you change the variables, you get different effects. And every person is unique. So their ability, their body chemistry is different, their moods, their expectations, their previous experience with that drug, all of those are unique. The drug itself, how pure is it? How much did you take? How did you take it? When was the last time you used it? And what was the setting? Were you at a rave and expecting to party and have that kind of thing going on? Or were you in a very different setting? So these are some of the things that it's good to know about. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, did we miss a slide there? Oh, I guess I did. Okay, all right. So how's our time here? So we're going to, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but we're going to look at a little video.
That video.
Yeah, I just want to introduce it briefly. So we're going to look at a short video. It's about fentanyl, and it's one that was created a few years ago. And it was created by the SASE team at the Vancouver School Board. I was part of it, and we involved our youth engagement workers and others in developing this. Have a look, and we'll talk about it briefly after.
So why are we all talking about it? What is fentanyl? And why is it critical we all know more about it? Fentanyl is a manufactured opioid drug that's medically administered for pain management and can be ingested several ways, including through the skin. Compared to other painkillers, fentanyl is incredibly strong. It's so powerful that an amount the size of 2 grains of salt is enough to overdose and kill. What's more, the drug is odorless, tasteless, and colorless, making its detection very difficult. By 2017, fentanyl was detected in over 80% of opioid overdose deaths. It's finding its way into pressed pills and powders, sometimes unintentionally through cross-contamination. This has significantly increased the amount of people who are now at high risk of accidental overdose. Unless tested, which is difficult and expensive, there is no way of knowing what drugs contain fentanyl. Even if one person can use from a batch and not be harmed, it doesn't mean that another person will get the same result. Think of baking chocolate chip cookies. Do all cookies come out with the same number of chocolate chips? More likely, one cookie could have 4 or 5 chips, and another 8, and another only 2. It's the same with grains of fentanyl. No 2 pills containing fentanyl have equal amounts. Aside from those being treated with medical fentanyl, there are 3 main groups who might come into contact with the drug. The first group is people who might regularly use illicit substances or opioid painkillers. By that, we might mean substances like cocaine, heroin, OxyContin, morphine, or Xanax. These people might have developed a dependence to painkillers for management of past injuries or traumas. Regular users have the most contact with fentanyl, but they might have also developed tolerances to opioids so that lower doses may have a less deadly effect. They are also more likely to be experienced in practices that could reduce the harm of a fentanyl overdose. Despite this, regular users are still at high risk of overdosing. Fentanyl is powerful. Things can go wrong quickly, even with safer practices. Our second group is people who might use pills or powders recreationally, perhaps at concerts, parties, or gatherings. While recreational users are not typically looking for fentanyl, they risk running into it while using a different contaminated drug. Finally, there are people who might be curious about trying pills or powders. This group may or may not have already used cannabis or alcohol and could find themselves in a scenario where trying a new substance is appealing. Inexperienced users are not prepared for how any one substance might react with their unique bodies, and everybody is affected by drugs differently. They also have no substance tolerance, so the drug's effects can be much stronger. A new user might accept a small dose of a drug from a trusted source and still wind up with fentanyl poisoning. There's just no way of knowing if fentanyl contamination has occurred. Trusting your source isn't enough to protect you these days. Informing our decisions regarding illicit substances, using our critical thinking skills while weighing the risks, and talking with people we trust are great places to start in keeping ourselves safe. If we were told that 80% of peanut-free granola bars had been contaminated with peanuts, what would we do as a community? How would we act to keep each other safe? And how would people with peanut allergies assess whether to try something or not? Avoiding all illicit pill and powder substance use while we continue to have a poison drug supply is the best way to keep yourself safe. However, if you or someone you know chooses to use, there are some ways to prevent an accidental overdose. Have someone else around. Use one substance at a time. Go slow. Be aware of your health and tolerance. And have someone around with a naloxone kit, a counteractive drug to fentanyl overdoses. A person might be experiencing an overdose if they cannot be woken up, they have slow or absent breathing, or they have cold skin and discolored lips and nails. If someone is experiencing these symptoms, call 911 immediately. We have a law under the Good Samaritan Act where anyone who calls 911 to help someone who has overdosed will not be charged with simple possession, and neither will the person who overdosed. Paramedics only want to help the person in need. For more information on fentanyl, its effects on the body, recognizing the signs of an overdose, and how to respond, take a look at the links in the video description.
Okay. Thanks, Deanna. You can put the slides back up. So, comments, questions, thoughts, anything you liked there, anything you didn't like, make you think about anything in particular? What was helpful?
I think it was helpful to hear that it's as small as 2 grains of salt that can contaminate a drug.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very small amount. I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
It's pretty toxic.
extremely. And carfentanil is even more powerful.
Yeah, so that's a good conversation to have, that it's out there and that it just takes that little bit.
Right. Deanna, can we put the link for the video in the chat?
Yes, I will get on that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, there's another chat here. Oh, thank you, Chris. Yeah, they're good pictures. I agree with you. That was a young man who was the artist for that. And it was really great working with him. His mother works in social services. He knew a lot about the opioid crisis and he really cared about it. But he also was a great artist who had a way of just representing people in situations that were quite realistic and yet kind of fun and interesting to look at. Any other comments, thoughts, questions? Yeah, thank you. Is it Leanne? Not judgmental. And why is that so important? I appreciate you mentioning it. And of course, I'll answer my own question, I guess, but oh, here. It's being scary, yeah. So important to be informed. Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's staggering to think about what are we at? 12,000 deaths now since the emergency was declared. Unbelievable.
6 a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're not getting a handle on it. We haven't turned the corner. We haven't even slowed it down. And that's why I think these sessions like we're doing tonight are so important. Because we've got to get with the program as a society. And it's not, and we've got some lovely treatment people on the call tonight. Thank God for you. We need treatment. We need more treatment, no question. But we're not going to solve the problem just with treatment, and certainly not with law enforcement. And even harm reduction, very important. I'm a big supporter of harm reduction. But we need to get to the root issues. And that's kind of the thrust of the presentation tonight is we know a lot about human behavior and how people feel and operate and what they do and why they do what they do. And we need to do a better job of coming alongside our young people so they feel supported and cared for and respected. And that's why the judgment thing, and I saw it in the chat there, somebody said, you know, if you are judgmental, we all know how that goes, right? People feel harshly judged, is what someone said here. Therese, thank you. And when you feel judged and shamed and blamed, then you don't want to deal with people and you don't want to deal with the topic. So we need to get comfortable with being a bit uncomfortable about talking about this and trying new things. You know, and things that really get at the root causes. Somebody's asking about naloxone and training for the kids, and I don't know, Deanna, if you want to say anything about it, but I know the health authorities all have programs where they can train people. Your public health nurse could possibly be a help there as well. And naloxone kits are available from the pharmacy, as someone has pointed out here. But I also want to just keep in mind too that, you know, opioids is usually at one place on a continuum of substance use. So when we see young kids doing much more minor drug use, we need to just be cognizant that depending what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it, they could end up in opioid use. They could inadvertently. Like I worked with a lot of kids who just wanted to try pills and powders. They'd heard about Xanax, they'd heard about ecstasy, they'd gone to a rave, whatever. And we said to them, you know, our best advice is no pills or powders are safe right now. We don't know what's in there. Your dealer doesn't know. Your dealer may tell you this is completely clean, but they actually don't know. So it's really important to support and educate our young people around this. But a lot of it comes back to their feelings, and the kids who have had really difficult situations in their early lives, they need help with that, to work through that. If you don't believe me, go to the treatment centers. And, you know, I used to connect with some of the folks there in the past a bit. And in fact, we had a way of some of them sharing some of their stories with young people. And so often those stories started with something like, when I was 13, I started smoking weed. And this is coming from a heroin addict in downtown Vancouver in a recovery center. So, and they're now in their late 30s or mid 40s. So we need to connect the dots. Now, there's lots of kids. I'm not trying to alarm anyone. I'm not trying to say that if your youngster comes home and they're 16 and they're high on cannabis, it's the end of the world and they're on this path of they're just going to get into the heavier and heavier use. No, not at all. But what I would ask any of us to always be mindful of, if we see young people who are using drugs frequently and regularly, use your spidey sense. What do you think's going on? Is it just social? Is it just to fit in, to have fun, to be part of the group? Or is it because it makes them feel what they need to feel? They're trying to deal with emotional and maybe physical pain. And if it's that situation, then we really need to try to respectfully come alongside and help guide them to get some support. New treatment center in town called New Tomorrow. Okay, I don't know anything about it. Good to know about. I think the Foundry is the Foundry coming to Kamloops in next year or something? Is that right?
It is. It should be here next year, and they're working on it. But you can also get on the website, Foundry BC website's open. They've got great resources on there as well.
They do. Thanks. It's Leanna? Leanne?
It's Leanne. Yeah, nice to see you. Hi, Leanne.
Yeah. So as Leanne was just pointing out, if you go to the Foundry website, they have a lot of really good resources. And I've got a bunch of websites at the end of my presentation and these slides are available to anybody. You'll be able to access those as well. I'm just looking at the chat here. Oh, I thought there was something. Yeah, okay. So I've got a bunch more slides, but I'm not going to do many of them. We've already been an hour. Maybe Diana, let's go ahead and put up the next one, and we'll go quickly. Okay, so this is now kind of back to communication. Stephen Covey. I think we're all, I've certainly been guilty of that. But you know, our young people, they pick up very, very quickly if we're actually genuinely interested. Or if, or if we're formulating our next thought. So yeah, thanks. Move us along here. Role model, we've already talked a little bit about that. Your actions are louder than your words. We always think I need to talk to my kids about drug use. Well, yes, you need to have lots of little conversations. But how you model prescription drugs, alcohol, anything else in your home. That is really, really important. We talked about sharing your expectations, encourage other activities, become informed. Carry on, next slide. You can listen your way to a better relationship with your teen. You can't talk your way. And there's a little picture of a carrot being peeled down below here. And the reason that's there is with the SASE program, I worked there for 15 years. I helped co-develop it and I managed it for 15 years. And we did a lot of parent education and parent workshops. And one of the things that we taught parents was about self-regulating. So to manage their own feelings. So if Susie comes home from school and says, that's it, I've had it with math, I'm quitting, I'm never going to math again, I've had it. And as a parent, you could go, oh my God, that's horrible. Don't you understand? Do you realize how important math is? That's crazy. You're insane to do that. You can react that way. Or you could go, wow. Or you could go, tell me more. Like there's lots of things you can do. And what we're trying to get at here is the more that we contain our own reactions, probably chances are the next day she's going to come to you and say, well, maybe I won't quit. And, you'll have opportunities and you might want to have 2 or 3 little conversations about math rather than just jumping on her right then and there and try and solve the whole thing immediately. Next slide, please. I want to just make a quick point about punishment. And, when we use that to, as adults, we get fearful and we try to control, people's behavior. And what I want to suggest to you is try to manage our own fear, get supports for ourselves, and try to take different approaches than trying to control your young person. You can't control anyone. But what we can do is influence and educate and support and come alongside. So when we punish kids, we activate the back of the brain, fight or flight or freeze or flock. And what we want to do is activate the front of the brain. So logical consequences, having discussions, talking about what happened, restorative justice, any of these other techniques, other than just a harsh, hardline punishment, are more likely to lead to some dialogue, some discussion. And you want to create an environment where the kid will eventually begin to go, what do I think of why I got drunk last night? They already know what you think. They know what you're going to say. But you want to try and create conditions where they begin to go, well, what do I think of the fact that I'm smoking marijuana 6 times a day now? So you want to give them that psychological freedom so they can begin to think about it. And they might say, I wouldn't mind cutting back a bit. I remember doing a vaping presentation and a kid sticking up their hand and saying, I know it's bad for me. I don't need to hear any of that. I want to know how to quit. I want to know how to cut back. So we have to create those conditions. Okay, next slide, please.
Sorry, Art, just before we go on to the next slide, there was a comment in the chat box that I thought might be great to just sort of interject, because I think, in my role, I certainly hear this often from parents who are struggling. And it's really one of those situations where we have our children, our teens that are maybe denying that there's any reason and really having a hard time, like the parents that are trying to get down to the why, but are really struggling to do that. It's just how do you get them to that next level and get them to accept help when they're refusing it or aren't really ready to say that there's a problem? I hope that I categorized that right.
It's a great question and a really important one, and I don't have any easy answer, but I have a few thoughts. The most important thing is to treat our young people with dignity and respect and maintain our relationship with them. And I could tell you stories of people on the downtown east side who, because their grandfather never gave up on them and left them a note at the needle exchange that they found, they actually went and got help. And that family had been through hell for years. And that person got clean. So you want to never give up and never drop the relationship. But with this specific situation, I would respect the kid. And if they say, I don't want to talk about it, or there is no issue, I would not argue with that. You don't have to agree with it, but you can say, okay, I understand that you really feel that, you know, there's nothing to it. The other thing that you might try is if you're noticing any consequences. So if somebody comes to me and says, Art, you drink too much, you should quit drinking or you should cut back, you got a drinking problem. I'm probably going to think to myself, take a flying leap, buddy. I don't need your advice. But if somebody comes to me and says, hey, Art, oh, wow, did you get in a fight again? Oh, you did? Yeah. Oh, geez. Was it bad or you okay? Oh, that's like your third fight this month, isn't it? Oh, and by the way, Art, did I hear you lost your job? Yeah. Oh, okay. Now you lost your last job after about 6 months. I'm just kind of wondering how things are going for you. So sometimes you can, with a young person, you might say, gee, I noticed you dropped out of sports and music. Those used to be so important to you. You're down with that? You're okay with that? Oh, and gee, I'm noticing you're failing 3 of your subjects now. And so what I'm getting at, I'm not necessarily giving you the exact words, but the idea is rather than talking about the drug use, talk about what you're seeing that you think might be related. And then if you get a little buy-in, if they sort of begin to say, you know, yeah, actually, I am failing quite a few subjects now, and I never used to fail subjects. You might be able to say, do you think that's in any way related to smoking weed 6 times a day? Or are those just completely separate? So you might be able to introduce, you know, the substance use. And then if they are willing to hear that, be ready to say, if you ever want to talk with someone about that, I know there's some really good people available and know how to contact. I want to call it Phoenix Center, but one day. Yeah. Or a comparable, like have something ready so that you can say, hey, you know what, there's really cool caring people that are available. If you'd ever like to just, you know, I'll go with you. I'll go with you, you know, do whatever you can. So that kind of thing is, man, maybe you want to add something to that, do you?
No, I agree with you, Art. Everything you're saying is absolutely correct. And I think oftentimes what we ask the young people is we just try to engage them in conversation about what's going on for them in their lives, that what kind of pressures they might be experiencing, how's school going for them, what relationship pressures there are. Are they working? Are they not working? You know, how are things for them emotionally? Do they have family support? Do they have friends that they feel safe with? It's really hard because it's like every kid is different, and the way they use or choose to use is different. Who they spend time with. So I think there's no right answer, but really it's keep the lines of communication open.
And thank you, Leanne. And it's also taking your lead from the kid.
Yeah.
So let the kid guide you. So if they don't want to talk about their drug use, don't push it. Be respectful. But try some of these other things. And we have to accept as adults. We do it with adults. I don't know why we find it so hard to do with kids. We don't carry it over. I think it's because we care so much about kids and we know their lives are just developing. But, you know, if I have a friend, an adult peer who says, you know, please don't talk to me about my drinking, or please don't, you know, whatever, I'm going to respect that. So we need to be careful that we don't get into ageism with young people and do that paternalistic talking down to because we have the power. Much better is that the adult brain comes alongside the adolescent brain and you walk together the path. Not the adult brain is over the adolescent telling them how to live, what to do, what not to do. And because then the kid's not going to think for themselves and have autonomy. And they're going to have to face these things on their own.
I think what kids need to hear too is if you're going to go out and use, if you're choosing to do that, if you're somewhere and you feel unsafe, phone me. phone me and I'll come
Absolutely.
get you. If you
Yep.
don't want to say you don't want to leave, we can have a code word and all you have
Yeah.
to do is say the code word and I'll come. You,
Yeah.
like, you make arrangements with your kids so that they understand that you're coming from a place of care and concern, that you're not trying to crash their party. You're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah,
keep
yeah.
them safe, right? It's not about
Yeah.
not wanting them to live life and have rich experiences for themselves, but
Right.
in this day and age, it's not like it used to be when, as parents, we might have gone out and indulged in our day. It's a lot more dangerous for people now.
Yeah, it can be for sure. There's a whole theory, Leanne, you would know this inside out and backwards, a theory called the stages of change. And sometime, those of you listening, if you have a chance, just Google stages of change. What it does, it'll show you contemplative, pre-contemplative, contemplative, I forget the other steps. And
Maintenance and action, yeah.
yeah, and that's helpful because that's a reminder that you might be dealing with what we call a pre-contemplative kid. And all that means is that they're a kid who's using, and they have no desire or interest in cutting back, quitting, or anything else. In fact, they would tell you, it's great, I love it, and I'll probably use more tomorrow, and I might even increase how much, they're into it. So when someone's at that stage, there's different things that you can do than when someone's at beginning to contemplate, beginning to realize, maybe because of some of the things that we were talking about, that, yeah, there's some things happening in my life that I'm not that happy about. I really like smoking weed, but I noticed I've lost 2 girlfriends in a row over it. I've noticed I lost one job. I'm not doing so good in school anymore, and I quit sports. And I do care about those things, but I really like weed. So, but maybe I should just slow down a bit, or, so that's a contemplative. They're beginning to reach out a tiny bit, and then you link them to skilled counselors, and it can go better. I just want to look at the chat here. Are there such things in Kamloops as a group therapy with counselors with kids at a certain age can hang out and discuss and learn and talk without the parents? And the next one is, I agree, but sometimes the drug use has to be discussed. Yeah, when it's affecting other people. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. And this is back to limits and expectations. And you're absolutely within your right as a parent to say there will not be drug use on our property in our home. If that's going to be your line, you have every right to that. And that can be really helpful to kids. Please, though, just don't assume that you have that kind of power over what happens when they walk out that door, because you don't. And it's better to realize that and know that what you want to do is build them up, or we are able to, so that when they are out there, they're going to do better. Why don't we go on to the next slide? So we are talking about changing how we feel, sensation seeking, low impulse control. Well, there's a lot of exciting things that people can do. And here's just a short list. So if your young person says, I'm really into rock climbing, or hip hop is really important to me, or I know a friend whose son was into paintball, and she hated it. The mother hated paintball, and had a rule in the house: no guns ever in this house. And this kid just loved paintball, and she realized, she was with it enough to realize this is a teenage boy, and he needed to burn off the ayahs, and she allowed him to get into paintball, which he did do for a number of years, and then he outgrew it and went on to other things. But it probably was a lot safer than maybe some of the other alternatives. And it's also showing respect to the young people if you support them in their passions. Next slide, please. So being a caring adult. So how would I know if my kid is using? Well, I think the next slide says a little bit more, but be observant. But my recommendation is don't go searching their room, don't go violating their privacy, but watch for changes in appearance, change in behavior, change in attitude. Now, those things are typical of adolescents too, aren't they? Any adolescent goes through some of that. So it can be a little tricky, but nevertheless, if you're really tuned in, identifying who's using isn't usually the hardest part. It's what you do once you know. Next slide, please. Have an agenda to listen. Kids know if you have an agenda. If you approach a young person, they can tell right away what's on your mind. Am I going to get the talk? Am I going to get the lecture? Or are you just wanting to hang out or whatever? Well, what if you had an agenda to listen? And short conversations over time, reflect back what you hear. Try to find common ground beyond the substance use. So if you do have a young person who is perhaps using alcohol or cannabis, there's a lot of other things that they do, and there's other common ground that you share. Maybe you both like mountain biking, or maybe you both like playing video games, whatever it is. Make sure to build that in, because that'll help strengthen the relationship. Okay, next slide.
Art, we just have a question from Teresa.
Oh, okay.
I
Is it
just
in the
thought
chat?
that this would be easier than trying to type this out.
Oh, sure.
I was just blown away by the last slide and what you said as far as like, don't be a detective and don't go looking and don't search and whatever, because from everything I've seen, I don't know, say talk shows or whatever of mothers or fathers who have lost their children to this kind of stuff, they say, you're the parent, like, do your due diligence and go through their stuff and do this and look for that, and because you could stop it from happening. So I mean, I see points on both sides, but
Yeah. No,
that's
thanks,
sort
Teresa.
of a tough one.
It's a
You
really
don't want to
tough one.
invade their privacy. Like, I mean, I have gone through the phone thing, but not the conversations. I don't want to know what they're saying because but like where I've looked at what he's searching, what he's watching, like this kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, this is a really complicated issue in many respects, but I thank you for bringing that up. It's kind of a personal preference thing at the end of the day, but I would just point out, try to put yourself in their shoes. And how would you feel if you learned that mom or dad went all through your dresser and your backpack and, where you store your sporting stuff, searching, digging, looking, because they're determined that, you've got a joint somewhere and I'm going to find it. Just the nature of it is a hard one for someone to accept. You probably wouldn't do that with a friend or with an adult. So just be aware there is a cost involved. And I think it's also based on a false assumption. And the assumption is if I just find out, then I can handle it. Well, it's pretty hard to handle even when and even kids that are using openly and got their bag of weed right on the table because the parents have said, we're going to do it, what the heck. So just knowing now that your kid is using doesn't necessarily solve everything. So, but like I say, at the end of the day, it really is up to you. In my years of experience and having talked to many parents and seen many kids go through a lot of stuff, that more often doesn't go well than turns out to be a helpful thing. But that is a bit of a generalization. We want to keep our kids safe, and it's really important to have discussions in the home and talk about drug use and about some of the risks and dangers. You might be able to find a middle ground where you involve the young person in negotiating. What I'd like to do is I'd like to be able to come and do a run through your room once in a while, and I'll let you know when I'm going to do it.
Basically, with me and my son, like he I'm always in his room because I do everything. I put the clothes away and I blah blah blah, and like, but he also knows, and I've told him like same thing, like I won't go through your conversations. I do not do it because I'm and like I said, I was a teenage girl. I had diaries like that were going through. I know how that feels. It's bad.
Sure.
And I won't, and I can trust you to have your friends and your conversations.
Well,
just basically like if you have nothing to hide, Like, what are you worried about?
Well, the
putting
thing
your
is,
stuff away?
Teresa, we all have something to hide sometimes, you know,
I
even
guess,
the
yeah.
adults. And so we need to be careful with that. But I think there was a slide earlier that said, don't be a detective, but be alert.
Yeah.
Like use your eyes. So
Yes.
you're in there
Mhm.
putting the laundry away. Good for you. And he really appreciates that.
Oh,
Well,
I'm sure.
keep your eyes open for sure. But at least then
Yeah.
you can say, if you need to, I was in your room putting the laundry away and I couldn't help but notice
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. That's a little different than I was suspecting that you were
Searching,
doing it
yeah.
and you weren't telling me. So by golly, I'm going to find out. And that just
Right.
sets up more of a conflictual situation.
Totally.
But
Anyways,
what
we're
do
just
you-
about,
Thank you.
okay.
I would just add to that what the youth will tell us quite often when they have a parent that's what they would say rummaging through their things with suspicion or concern, they would just say, we just get sneakier. We just find better
Yeah, for
places to hide things, right? And so I think if they're going to want to hide something, they're going to hide it from you the best that they can, and they're going to fight to not want to share it with you. I think if you keep the lines of communication always open and just let them know how important they are to you, and that you don't want anything to happen to them, and
Mhm.
that their wellness really matters, and that's a whole emotional, social, there's a lot to it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think, as long as you're keeping the communication open, they're going to talk to you eventually. It might not be when you want it to come, but it will come.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's a very important point. Thank you, Leanne. What you're doing is you're putting money in the bank when you treat people with respect and dignity, and you create conditions where one day they will open up more. It reminds me of I've counseled parents a lot around what do I do when Johnny comes home drunk, or my daughter comes home and she's just really high on cannabis. And so one of the things we recommend is we put them to bed, make sure, but the next morning, how about saying to them, rather than jumping on them, say, you came home drunk last night and I told you never to do that. And now you just, that's not going to go anywhere. If you say something like, hey, pretty sure when you came in last night, you were really drunk. And I want to talk with you about it. So sometime before dinner today, when you're ready, let's sit down and we'll have a chat about it. So now you've given them permission to go away and go, oh my gosh, she knows. Oh crap, what am I going to do? Should I lie? Should I deny it? They can work through all their stuff so that when you finally sit down, what we recommend is rather than you saying, here's all the problems I have with that and why you shouldn't have done that, you can say, just establish what happened. You were drunk last night when you came in. Yes, okay. Next question I would recommend should be, how are you feeling about that? What do you think about that? And not in a trick way, in an honest and authentic way of I'm interested in how that strikes you. Because then you're giving them permission to go, actually, Mom, I'm really embarrassed. I feel really stupid. And I didn't mean to, and it's not going to happen again. Or they might go, it was great. I loved it. And I'll probably do it again tonight. You don't know what they're going to say, but you're giving them that permission. Because then, after you've allowed them to talk about how they feel, then you can say, I'd like to share with you how I feel about it. And not just how you feel about it. And you can have strong feelings. There's no problem with that. But the key thing is, tell them why. So you have to be able to say, I really feel strongly that you're 13 years old and you got drunk, falling down drunk. And that really, really concerns me. And I'll tell you why. And the why is things like, you could have been sexually taken advantage of, you could have gotten in a fight, you could have had a car accident, you're too young. You can have some pretty solid reasons that really are saying to the kid, I care about you. And I want you to be safe and healthy. So yeah, those are some of the, we better wrap this up here. Next slide, please. Relationships move at the speed of trust. So there again, and these are researchers who've studied this stuff, and that's why we have to be so careful not to violate the trust. Next slide, please. Listen, do nothing, no fixing, no minimizing. Think of the challenge happening for them, not to them. Make sure the kid feels seen, understood, Okay, next slide. These are kind of repetitive. So it's about relationships more than it is about drugs. Next slide. Stay curious, suspend your assumptions, accept that it might be uncomfortable, and be present. You know, I'm guilty of it too sometimes, but I see parents of young kids at the playground and the mom or the dad is just glued to their phone the whole time. And when I was raising my kid, we didn't have cell phones. So I was on the monkey bars with her a good part of the time. And sometimes that's good. Next slide. So here are some of the sources where you can get more information. And in some cases, some supports around treatment. If you go to the next slide. So here I would just point out, oh, I thought I had Phoenix on here. Anyways, that very first number, the 800 number, there's trained counselors on the other end of those lines, and they know of all the services in the whole of the province anywhere, and they won't just give you the quick rushed response. They'll take time with you and say, well, what's going on? Tell me about it. And okay, here's what I think you need. Next slide. Yeah, amplify the positive. So we want to be strengths-based with our kids. If we focus on the deficits, on the shortcomings, on the negatives, it's discouraging for them. And they can get depressed and they can get anxious and they can get where they want to change how they feel. And one way to do that is with alcohol and drugs. And it does it quickly and powerfully and with little effort on their part. And if their friends see it as cool and tough and with it, it's very reinforcing. So we want to create conditions where they won't do that. I think Leanne just put the contact info in there for Day One. Thank you, Society. And her number, great. Okay, so I think that might be the last slide. So I'm going to, respect of time, I'm going to thank you all very much for your time tonight. I've really appreciated the input on the verbally and on the chat line and participating in a few little activities. It's a big topic. I hope you feel a little more hopeful. I hope you know that we're not powerless. There are things we can do, and we're going to get better at it, and we're going to do a better job as a society. I believe it, and we can do better in our own families too if we all keep working at it. Thank you. And if there are final comments or questions, I'm not in a rush, but if you do need to slip away, we understand.
Yes, Art, thank you so much on behalf of everyone here. This was really informative. And I know for myself, having, I'm a mom of 4, and tonight you really gave me some language to be able to sort of have the conversation with some more confidence, moving forward. And it's a difficult topic to discuss. And I think you hit it on the head. It's because we love our children and we care about them. There's more at stake, I guess.
Yeah.
Then maybe it might be having a hard conversation with one of your friends. And so I just want to thank you tonight for giving us some practical language to be able to use with our children and our youth. So thank you, Art. If anybody wants to stay behind, ask Art a question. I'll keep the Zoom link open, and know that you can find this online as well. We're going to put it up on our parent resource page on our district website, and so you can find it there under parent resources. I think that's where they've been uploading the videos. So reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns as well. Appreciate any kind of feedback you have. I hope you guys found this helpful. If you want to write something in the chat, giving us a little bit of feedback, you can do it directly to me on the chat if you'd like, or you can send me an email. Any kind of information would be great. So thank you, everyone. Have a great night.